Hi, and welcome to the Wisefish Chess Academy for another beautiful video from the 2025 Super Bell Classic in Romania. This is a Grand Chess Tour that's happening in Romania, and this is the round four, round three. And we had very exciting games. And this one we're going to showcase today is a game between Caruana and Alireza Firouzja. In one of the previous games, we actually showed Alireza with another beautiful game, and this one it is very exciting. Grandmaster Caruana, who's number two in the world, um, played a very beautiful endgame. And I just want to walk us through this game. It's a Queen's Gambit decline, and the variations kept on changing from symmetrical into the barman variation. But it's a very interesting system where both sides castle along. I think it's a very instructive video. Let us delve into it and enjoy. So Alireza Firouzja with the white pieces played d4, b5 with 3, knight 6. Symmetrical at this point. This is referred to as a queen's pawn game, symmetrical variation. And then it went c4, and we're going to the queen's gambit. And it was declined, so it switches into the queen's gambit decline variation, but with the 3 knights. After the next moves that happened, knight b to d7, then we went into the actual variation that was played. Knight b to d7, this is the barman variation of the queen's gambit decline. And this is a very interesting choice by Grandmaster Caruana. This gives so many opportunities, like c5, play e6, later on even silent a6, or actually a5. And those moves all are optional and are available in this position. So giving a very dynamic position, you can kind of switch from one thing to the other. So white has to really be careful. And from white's perspective, the plan is basically the same as we'll see in the game. So captures the exchange variation, captures on d5, captures on d5, and now you see the symmetry is kind of broken because now white is going to have a pawn chain from f2 to d4, and black is going to have a pawn chain from b5 to b7. And that's where we start to see the structural differences in this position. So typically bishop g5, just to develop a bishop and put some pressure. C6 as expected, queen c2. This is typical in these queen's gambit positions. That is one of the best positions of the queen, because we anyway expect the pawn to go to e3 or maybe later on to e4. So black played bishop e7, e3 as expected, knight to h5, and basically this is a concession. I want to exchange the bishop. White doesn't have choice unless he goes for a very silly move like h4, in which case you land into things like f6, and the position becomes a bit messy. I think black would just simply be better after that move. So bishop captures, queen captures, d4, very aggressive move, which actually just, stage. Because white seems to have overstretched already, but really pretty nothing. I would play that move. It's pretty interesting. Take away the knight, then go back to h6, activate the rook, and this is quite a very aggressive system. So you just have to be careful not to overstretch. But I mean, hitting the knight, you're just going to get the knight into the center square, and that's exactly what black wants to do anyways. So knight at b6, and just creating opportunity for the bishop to move, and forcing some matters from black as the pawn on g4 is now attacked. So h3, and as you can see, white's moving forward. The pieces have actually been slowed down. The aggressiveness has been slowed down. I'm sure it's contemplating playing moves like g5 immediately, but it might be a bit too committal, and you might have run into things like g6, bishop coming to f5, hitting the queen, and then you have to reorganize your pieces yet again. White's ideas are basically to play bishop to e3 and probably to castle on the wrong side. And in the game, it was actually interesting that black actually went to castle on the wrong side. It's supposed to, I guess, in respect the fact that White's queen side, king side was actually quite already aggressively developed. So bishop e6, bishop to d3, g6, just as we had expected, castles, castles. And now the Indian said black just like that. I think it's due to the fact that black's piece is probably, uh, I don't know, can't even see what exactly the advantage is, but possibly that he has a hold on the e5, e4 square. Maybe because he also has interesting ideas of king b8 rook, and then maybe pushing this pawn forward and creating some pressure here. But of course, no, white should be able to do the same and get his king to safety, and also get the rook to challenge that file. Right now, it's a semi-open file, but later on, it should be open as you'll see in the game. So, maybe one, like we just said, G8. So E8. And then we have king. And we there was a king setting. I believe the plan is to get both rooks. Not the first rook to B1, the second rook to C1, and probably just same thing that he has done on the king's side. And recently pushing his pawns to do the same on the king's side and getting the top. So what happened is rook played to C8, and he didn't play my idea. Of course, it's strong suburban master. He has his own ideas which are much stronger than mine. So he played knight to d2, and a lot of maneuvering here, and black finally strikes, forcing white to make a concession and push the pawn to g5. Capturing, we must say that capturing this pawn on h5 just really creates a lot of problems for no good reason, because this pawn a3, h3 becomes a target, and by both the bishop and the rook, and it will fall with no compensation. So the game went g5, knight goes to d7, f4 again, and then black rapidly breaks in the center. Of course, this gives up the b5 square, but hey, this is chess. I gave you something, you give me something. So capture the knight, and now this bishop. If you retreat it, you're going to waste a move. You also then get the bishop on c5, but f5, and they're going to get a little messy in that setup. So rightfully, Firuza being the strong grandmaster he is, went for the idea of knight attacks the rook on c7, and this presents a very, very dynamic position. So of course now rook just easily retreats. Of course, that is a win for white, because the rook moved to c7 and been forced to go back. So it looks like black has kind of lost something. The game is actually equal at this point. But there's so many pieces on the board, so it means that everyone has to be really pretty careful what will happen next. So queen goes to c3. And of course, there are different ideas. One of the ideas to play queen to e5 and at the moment, but of course, these two squares are watched heavily. But of course, that is something that you have to watch out for. Expect that isn't the plan of this game. So bishop attacks the knight. You have to take away the pieces that are creating the chaos on that side of the board, but also watching having a clear hold on e5. So it can no longer check on that square. So key things to see in the position, and then we have queen going to e3. Something to move that, and simply threatening with finally checkmate. And so the move bishop times knight becomes be too easy to calculate. Bishop times rook goes back. So black is getting back to his simple plan. White does the same. You might be thinking that there's a little tactic here, but of course, this when you do that, the queen will capture back, protecting the rook. Just be careful that the queen is. So that kind of works. So they all pile of pressure on the c5, and this is very instructional. The same idea is still kind of work. A knight jumps to a very interesting square, knight to e4, and this is just creating a lot of exchanges on the board. And this is where Firuza actually started to go wrong, because this knight is creating a lot of pressure in that center. You're hitting on the knight on d2, hitting on the pawn on f2, and then there's so much going on. I mean, the battery versus battery, and then we have queen hitting each other to use so much pressure in the center, number of weakness in the position. But I see what happens. Rook captures, uh, queen captures. And this is a very tricky point because if you capture rook times rook, and maybe let's just show that the evaluation goes to plus 4.7. And if you play this with the simple idea, just checkmate. You just get into a lot of problems. Because if you cannot have a checkmate, they can easily get up by playing a move like uh, e4, and there's no checkmate. And then you have to figure out why you have to sacrifice your queen for that. Your two knights and the rook cannot coordinate better than the queen and the bishop. So that doesn't work. So in practice, the queen rook captured the knight. And because there's so much pressure on this pawn, white is actually forced to capture the knight. And Caruana captures Queen's rook. Now, there's pressure here. White also has some ideas of going to be to e8. As of now, the rook is watching that, so it's impossible for that to happen. So white has to concede and play rook h1. And gentlemen, you can see that the position is actually really, really changed, and there's so much that can happen. And if you take a look at this position, if it is something very, very simple, very easy plan, good plan is best to get strike in the center. There's so much weakness in that area, and if you concede to take, then this pawn or at least one of your pawns is going to fall. And it's going to be down a pawn without any compensation. So he tried to be dynamic, but of course, this takes away the idea of bishop going to e8. But he did it anyway. So rook goes to g4, and then bishop goes down. Now, you, of course, the weaker players would be thinking of moves like this one. But once you play a move like this, it's going to just, I mean, you're going to stay defending forever because you can lose the pawn even almost immediately, and you really can move it forward. You can defend it, because if you do, you lose this other one. So everything just becomes a problem. You cannot do anything when you play that move. However, the position equal according to the engine, but you are down by, and then endgame again to very experienced players like this. And the knight would easily dominate that bishop. The bishop can really. So this one happened. Bishop goes to c2, then rook goes down to g2 as expected. Captures. And king, you need those king moves to get your king into a center position. And Caruana played his knight to c5, c4, just to activate it, and then put it in the center place. Now here it is preventing the bishop from, going in. And then the same time it is watching pawn on f7. Now, the super grandmasters thing is a bit very, very unique. And so they look at how to, strangulate the opponent and really give them no space at all to be creative. When the grandmasters say that you should not give your opponent a chance to show their talent in your game. And this is a very unique thing that we learn from this game. So rook came to the exchange, and of course it doesn't work because the knight is already watching the pawn. Rook goes to a better position, rook gets back, and this is just my routine, uh, a routine finish. So now both pawns are actually attacked, although now there's pressure here. And actually, this was a bit of blunders by Grandmaster Caruana. He needed to just go for the H2 an idea, H2, H4, just pawn on H4 idea. And that would really, he would win by a lot of material because the way to take this pawn, the white needs to jump with the bishop. And if you stay rook versus rook, then that is an easy endgame. So he went on here and actually played in for these ideas. The game became actually dead equal. We found some interesting tactical ideas. And from here onwards, it's just routine, typical how these grandmasters play. And it was easy for Caruana to win this game. So I just watched the next moves, and you see it became a bit tricky towards the end. Again, he went wrong with these ideas, and you see that it's getting really a bit tricky and complicated. But he still found a way to win. So again, by the way, is again quite equal. You just need to be really, really careful about it. Now, at this point here, when you play the pawn move, the computer suggests rook b3. Big difference between rook b3 and that is queen a8. Check if you push the pawn forward. Rook b3. And then you really have to check here because that if the rook goes to d1, that becomes a problem. I think it's 6. And I guess this should be a draw. There's just no way to go here. That leads to very queen b4 check. Queen b4 check. And then queen goes to e8 and queen b5. Yeah, that's pretty good. That will happen in the game. So you have to be really, really careful. So the simple difference between rook d3 and rook d1 is something that changed the game. So after rook d1, then the pawn can easily match, and ideas do not really work. But now the queen has a lot of space to actually have checks which will fork and capture the rook. So the game went on like this. It's like KG position, and because the rook and king quite informationally, it's easy to actually make a mistake. And after these series of moves, the game actually came to an abrupt end. In like that, if the king moves to f8, the queen goes to d8, and then you queen or whatever, and then queen captures and check. And consequently, if you go to king d8, then queen steal on d8 would be a checkmate. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for viewing this channel and this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Continue to click like, subscribe, and tell your friends about it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.